We've heard a lot from politicians on how they want to make Parliament work. But how many of us actually know how Parliament is supposed to work, especially in an age of minority governments? There's a lot of confusion and misinformation, but as Keith Bogue found, there's a move to give Canadians a democratic reality check.
We're in a constant electionitis fit of toxic partisan attacks, and that's our politics, and that stinks.
That's not your average disgruntled Canadian voter on a rant. That's Peter Russell, perhaps the country's leading authority on Canada's Parliament. And he says our politics stinks. Russell believes minority governments are good because unlike majority governments, they have to pay attention to Parliament. And he believes minorities have worked well in Canada too. At least they used to. Russell is at the centre of an effort to pull together a sort of everyman's guide to how Parliament is supposed to work and how governments are formed in this country. A guide that could become the standard authority for politicians, bureaucrats, and Canadians. The effort has appeal right across the political spectrum, as represented by this panel which met last week.
I think the events of 2008 also told us that we need to have a bit of a conversation about our system of government.
The events of 2008. That's when the Liberals and NDP formed a coalition to try to defeat the government in the House of Commons, and then asked the Governor-General to allow them to govern.
Well, 2008 changed the whole chemistry of parliamentary life.
Faced with a defeat in Parliament by a coalition that would replace them, the Conservatives reacted by suggesting it was illegitimate for Parliament and the Governor-General to decide who should govern the country. Yet that is how our parliamentary democracy works.
And I think what we want to do is basically take a time out and go over the heads of the members of Parliament, go over the heads, frankly, of the Governor-General, go right to the Canadian people. Ministers
made statements about coalition government that were false.
It puts the Bloc Québécois on the government side of the House. It gives them an extraordinary amount of power.
First of all, of course, the Bloc wasn't in the coalitions.
Russell watched it all in disbelief.
That's right.
Let me be very clear. Canada's government cannot enter into a power-sharing coalition with a separatist party.
The Prime Minister misled the country, not just the Prime Minister, his party colleagues, his party machine. Mr. Harper's a strong party leader and Prime Minister, but he has a big political party. That's part of what he does. And they cooperated with this misinformation campaign big time, and I think they feel they've benefited from it up to now.
Britain in 2010 faced a similar challenge. Elections resulted in a hung parliament. No party had a majority. But there they negotiated who would form a government.
Clearly, should the discussions between Mr. Cameron and Mr. Clegg...
The Conservatives and Liberal Democrats decided to share power and moved relatively smoothly into a coalition. In Britain, there were well-publicized guidelines about how minority parliaments work, and so there was no panic about coalition government. The difference between the countries is that in Britain there is widespread understanding of how Parliament works. In Canada, there is not, says Russell.
We live in a parliamentary democracy, not a prime ministerial democracy, not a presidential. We elect parliaments, and they decide who gets to govern. You know, it's almost as simple as that, Keith. People, and just keep that in mind.
Keith Bogue, CBC News, Toronto.